Welcome. My name is Dan Predale, and I'm the Assistant Dean over the Emeritus Institute, and I'm so pleased to be with you here today. The Dorothy Marie Lowry Distinguished Guest Lecture Series has been a stalwart part of the Emeritus Institute for numerous years now. 4 years ago, we were honored to name this class after Miss Dorothy Marie Lowry, who generously endowed over $2.5 million to the Emeritus program. And in her honor, we are so grateful to continue the legacy of lifelong learning, of active mental stimulation, social engagement, academic rigor, and health improvement that she so dearly loved and certainly aspired that many, many of our community members, including yourselves, got to participate in. Our lecture series is about confronting what we may or may not know and opening up our minds to new possibilities. Today, we are pivoting quite significantly, but just like Richard Nixon's second term, you can see there's been a change. So we have we have Greg Jenks here today. Again, our apologies. These things happen, and we were notified this morning that our speaker for today, Dr. Gregory Cumming, would not be able to be with us today. We found out about 8:50. So if you've seen me scrambling around but smiling, but running around, that is the reason why. So I apologize. I was also looking forward to Mr. Cumming or Dr. Cumming's lecture today. Nevertheless, we have another Greg here. So it is my pleasure today to introduce both the faculty moderator for this series, as well as an Emeritus Institute instructor, Dr. Gregory Jenks. Dr. Jenks holds a master's in theology and a PhD in New Testament studies, both from Dallas Theological Seminary. He is a Pauline Christologist and an avid traveler and an author. Today, his lecture will be talking about, you can see there, My Karma Ran Over Your Dogma, which is a great and cheeky way of talking about free thought philosophy, its historical beginnings, as well as leading up to the Enlightenment. There's a couple housekeeping things I would like to make note of. Please do silence your cell phone today, and if today or in the future, if you are in need of listening assistance, the box office in the lobby is able to provide listening services for you that connect right into the audio system here. We are also grateful that Laguna Woods Village is taping these lectures, and we will be placing those on YouTube if you want to catch up with those or share them with family or friends. And so please note that filming and audio recording are occurring throughout this series. At the end of each week as well, you will receive a survey link to let us know what you appreciated, what we could do differently, and overall satisfaction with this class. Thank you again, and please welcome Dr. Gregory Jenks for today's lecture.
Well, good morning. I don't know what kind of surprises you were expecting this morning, but when I called Dr. Cumming this morning, he's a federal employee. Oh. So he did not realize that he needed to inform me that he was not going to be able to make it, but anyway. And I'm very happy to be with you today. My name is Dr. Greg Jenks, and I'm been on faculty here for 4 or 5 years, and I teach my PhD is in New Testament studies, the second half of the Bible. So I teach Greek. Not here, but I teach in other places Greek. I teach theology, Pauline theology. I teach about Jesus. Last year, I gave the last lecture of the Distinguished Guest Lectureship Series on the survival of the Bible, and that is really my area of expertise. That's where I spend most of my time. But I've also done a lot of work in theology and philosophy. And as a result, I teach a class here on the history of free thought in the Western world. And some of you guys don't even know what that means. History of free thought in the West. What's free thought, and what's Western world, and what? And I just want to encourage you to take the class because it's a fun class. And I'm learning a lot about it as well. And what I'm going to share with you today comes directly from my research and study on the history of philosophy in the Western world. And I'm going out on a limb here. I was hoping to give this lecture in March. And I may only give half the lecture now because that's where I've gotten to in my own research. And I want you to know something. It's a very controversial topic. That's why I wish I was over-prepared rather than under-prepared. And I'm risking something. I'm risking saying things that might give me a break. I might say things that I'd want to take back later. I've been thinking through a lot of things, and I'm going to, you need to know that I'm talking about, you look at this, my karma ran over your dogma. The subtitle of this was Free Speech Falling on Deaf Ears. What I've been challenged by, what all of us are challenged by in today's world is everybody's talking, and you don't know who to trust. And nobody's listening. We're all listening, but we don't know who to trust. And we're nervous. America's full of anxiety today. You're full of anxiety today. I mean, it used to be you could trust the media. Not completely. You knew there are advertising dollars involved, and they're manipulating you a little bit. But now, it seems like every time you access the internet or turn on your TV, you get outraged about something. And there's motivation. You realize it's just not just financial motivation to get advertising dollars. There's people behind the news that are changing, they're taking data and skewing it in such an obvious way that you can see right through it. And then you wonder, what is really going on? And you don't know. And it creates a lot of anxiety. We want to know what's going on. I don't know if we could ever trust our politicians. Today was Richard Nixon Day, right? Dr. Cumming is also an expert on Ronald Reagan. And, I know a lot of people in this room go, yeah, Ronald Reagan. Can you trust Jimmy Carter? Can you trust Richard Nixon? Can you trust JFK? Can you trust George Bush? Can you trust your politicians to act in your best interest as your leader? Religion. Well, certainly we can trust the Pope. Right? Or all those priests. Right? And I know I'm talking to a lot of Catholics in this room, and you're disappointed in your own church. And we're struggling as a culture. We're anxious. We want to know what's really going on. On a personal level, you don't know what to believe, what to think. And I'm struggling. I'm anxious. You should be able to trust your college professors, right? They're not biased. You send your 18-year-old to college, you spend thousands and thousands of dollars for them to get an education. You recommend the sciences to them because you hope they'll make some money and pay off their school debt. Unlike PhD in New Testament guy over here. I have a special fund set up if you want to help me get out of my debts. If I had a son, I would push him to get in the humanities. I'd push him to study philosophy, to study literature, to study the arts. Not because you make any money at this, which is kind of the criteria now, isn't it? For so much of what is valuable or not, whether or not it makes money. My mom wanted me to become a medical doctor. And then she said, well, at least become a psychiatrist. You know, a compromise between the sciences and the arts, right? And when I got into the Bible, you know, she comes from a Christian background. I'm a Christian, come from a Christian background. You know, in my culture, in my small little world, it should be very valuable doing what I chose to do with my life. But it wasn't so in my family. It wasn't so in my limited circle. I had to choose to go against the stream within my own Christian culture to choose the route I took. I was criticized. And the reason is it doesn't make much money. And who's to say who's right? And college professors are biased. And you're just going to get a warped perspective. You're going to come out distorted. Those liberal college professors, right? Or those conservative, or whatever you want to go with on that. Who do we trust? Who do we trust in society? Let me tell you right off the bat, don't trust me. I'm going to give you a lecture today, and my lecture is something that's extremely biased. I'm just going to tell you up front. I know I'm biased. I've been raised I'm raised in Southern California and Texas. Now, you know, Southern California, I don't know if you know this, but you are a little bit, you know, the needle swings a little. You're not dead center of world thought in Southern California. And let me tell you something, Houston, Texas is not either. And I know I've lived in a world that is very biased. I know I'm not average. I'm eccentric. I'm off-center. What I'm realizing is all of you are just as off-center as I am. And some of you are a lot, whoa, how did you get out there? You're way out there somewhere. But I want to start my lecture by telling you that, and I want you to think of everything I'm saying with a critical eye. You have to be today, don't we? We have to listen to CNN News and think, is that really what happened? Fox News, is that really what happened? Whether it's the president or his critics talking, we're always asking, is that what really happened? We don't know. And we're struggling with that. And what I'm going to say up here is hopefully a reasonable argument for something. But I'm going to ask, we're going to have a time of question and answer, maybe even in the middle, because this is a very impromptu speech on my part. But I want to get your feedback. I want to get you thinking at least about a topic that I find very, very interesting. And I think you will too. I want you to think about who do you trust? Who can we trust? How do you live in an environment where we're not sure where we're heading as a people, as a nation, as a globe? What's the goal of all this? And maybe I'm not going to get through all of this today because I had 30 minutes to prepare. But I'll get through part of it, and at least I hope to stir up your minds to think a little bit. If I can do that, I think I've accomplished my goal for today. So let's just start. By the way, a lot of my talk is based on my free thought class. So if you like what I'm talking about, you can still sign up for my free thought class. It meets on Tuesday mornings from 10 to 12 over at St. George's. And we have a good time talking. It's kind of a full class. I'll just tell you that. There's probably about 5 or 6 spots still available. But this is the stuff we talk about in that class. So what I say at the very beginning of class is this. Now I'm talking about Western thought. I know there's some people that are in this class that have come from Asia, from different parts of Asia, from China or Japan or Korea or other parts. And what I'm focusing on is Western thought. And when I say that, I think it's really important to emphasize that. I'm dealing with European and American, European thought and the origins of America when I say this. But there are 2 major events that have happened in world history that have changed your thinking as a Southern California American in 2019. And you say, really? And let me tell you what the two are. You're going to go, let's agree. Okay, fine. You can disagree. It's okay. I'm not, I'm easy. But here are the two events. Are you ready? The first is the Jesus event. I am not promoting religion this morning. That is not my goal, but I want you to think about this. Every one of you have been influenced by the Jesus event. Even if you are celebrated Hanukkah or some other holiday this past month, our culture has been affected by this one event. And I'm going to explain why. And you might be surprised why I think this event is one of the most important events in world history. The second event, in fact, what we're going to talk about is what happened before this event that led into it and show why it is so significant for the way you think today. The second event is Descartes and the Enlightenment. These are the two events that I think have the biggest impact on the way you think today. So, I don't care what religion you are. I don't care where you went to college. I don't care. I just say these two events are the most important events that shape American thinking, the way you think. So let's just talk about it. By the way, some of my slides are going to be a little bit abrupt. The Jesus event united two streams of thought: polytheism and monotheism. It became culturally accepted and politically and popularly dominant. This is what we don't edit. I didn't have time to work through this too much. It eventually became dogmatic and oppressive, leading to mass injustices. The Jesus event was critical because what happened before it was very disorganized. It organized world thought, and when I say Western world thought, became a dogmatic center that everybody believed. The Holy Roman Empire was holy. By 481 AD, you had to be a Christian to be a Roman citizen. It united the whole world. It eventually corrupted and became a source of injustice. Then we have the birth of the Enlightenment 1,000 years later, which is a reaction to religious conflicts and dogma. We use Descartes as the father of the Enlightenment or the father of modern philosophy. I'm going to talk a lot about Descartes today. The individual became the center of his world. That's a shift from twoism to oneism. I'll explain what that means in a second. And the individual ipso facto is required to be responsible for knowledge, wisdom, and justice. So you are now responsible to know everything, to be absolutely wise, and to be just. And I'm going to ask you at the end of the class, are you? And that's the problem we're facing today. All right, so I'm going to talk about the progress of history, what happened. So this is kind of a history class. I ask you to bear with me. I want you to think a little about this. It starts with Greco-Roman philosophy. If we go back to 800 BC, and I spent a lot of time in philosophy. I know I have a lot of philosophy majors in this group. I love our Emeritus Institute. We have a lot of PhDs and all kinds of things, and we have some humanities people in here. And you might know a lot more about this than I do. I've spent a lot of time in Greco-Roman thought, especially in the first century, but I've gone back to the classics in the 8th century, and you have Thales, you have people... The Greeks and the Greeks trying to ask good questions about their world. And they're trying to say, what is our world? Who are we as humans? What is our purpose in life? Have you ever asked that question? Why am I here? Who am I? They're asking the questions you ask. Why is the world the way it is? They ask questions about the material world. Why is there lightning and thunder? Where does it come from? What about the stars? The sun? What about land, earth, water, fire, air? They're asking questions about the material world. They're also asking questions about the immaterial world. They're asking the question whether or not objects, there's an immaterial component to every material object. So Thales said this: the whole world, everything, all material substance is merely water in a different form. Is he right? No. But it was an he was making rational, naturalistic observations, trying to understand his world. He also said that every object you see has a soul or has an immaterial part to it. This is 8th century BC. So he's already asking questions about the material and immaterial world. The basic thing I think we need to take away from Greco-Roman philosophy is this: it's a human effort to rationally try and figure out this world, and if you can't figure it out, you know what you fill it up with? A god. So you have Thanatos, you have Martes, you have different gods who are capricious. They're not moral, but they're immortal, and they control our world. The only thing that controls a Greek god is fate. They are slaves to fate, but aside from that, they can do anything. They're powerful. And you say, that's superstitious. I don't believe in any of those polytheistic, that's a bunch of... And I get it, but they're just trying to understand their world from a rationalistic perspective. That's Greco-Roman philosophy. Then we come along to Jewish monotheism. Now, Jewish monotheism predates, I know I have a lot of Jews in this room, Jewish monotheism predates Greco-Roman philosophy in the sense that it's historical. It's written documents that predate Thales and the Greek philosophers. And what does Jewish monotheism teach? Well, Moses is out walking, tending sheep one day. You know that Moses, Charlton Heston, that guy? He's out tending sheep one day, and he looks up, and oh my gosh, there's this bush that's burning. You know the story? This is from the Bible. He's tending sheep. He's a shepherd, right? Now, you got to know something about Moses. First of all, 40 years before this, he's 40 years old when this happened. 40 years before this, he's 80 years old. 40 years before this, he was in Egypt, and he was, it's a long story, adopted by Pharaoh. He was a Jewish guy when the Egyptians were threatened by the Jews and were trying to kill him. They were trying to kill all the male children that were born. Moses was rescued from infanticide and adopted into Pharaoh's household. So he was both Jewish and a prince. And he knew that the Jewish people were being oppressed. He killed an Egyptian trying to free the Jewish people, and he got caught, and he went running. For 40 years, he's a fugitive. But there's nothing like God. God is not a part of this at that point. He's tending sheep, 80 years old. He looks up and sees a burning bush. This bush that's on fire. It's on fire, but it's not burning up. And he goes, what's that all about? He did the same thing you do. What's that? That's interesting. He walks up, and this voice speaks to him. He's never heard this voice. Take off your shoes, Moses. The place you're standing is holy ground. Now listen, that's the story that's in the Bible. It's a total reversal from Greco-Roman thinking, from Greek thought with polytheism. It's no longer man trying to figure out the world using rationalistic thinking. It's God. One God, monotheistic God, the creator of the world, intervening in world history and talking to this guy named Moses. Think about it. It's a total different cosmology. A totally different way about thinking about the world. And you know the story, if you've, follow the news, Moses writes the Bible and leads the people of Israel, the Hebrew people, out of Egypt and into their own land. And they become the people of God, the chosen people of the one creator God who's in charge of thunder and lightning and all the other things that polytheism fulfilled. Are you with me? Are you tracking? So that is why I say that the Jesus event is so significant? Because the Jesus event united secular polytheists and Jewish monotheists. Do you know Christianity originated as a Jewish movement? Jesus was a Jew. Now, if you read the Bible, take my New Testament class on this. We're doing it right now. You know, if you read the Gospel of John, you find that Jesus' biggest enemies were Jewish leaders. But here's the problem. This is all inner Jewish stuff. The earliest church was a Jewish sect movement as well. In fact, one of the biggest controversies of the whole Bible is whether or not non-Jews can become a part of it. And eventually, as we know, it becomes an international movement. By the 4th century, Caesar, who in the 1st century was considered a god, now Caesar Constantine bows his knee to the one God because popular vote is a good political move. He needed to do that because no one believed that he was God, and everybody believed that the God of the Jews was the one true God. They gave up their polytheism. By the 4th century, you say, how did that happen? These people must have been really stupid, ignorant people to just buy into this monotheistic belief, and that's not the case. People from rich, poor, smart, college-educated, peasants that didn't know anything, it swept the whole Western world. There are many books. This is something, if you're really interested, there's lots of stuff being written about this today. How did Christianity take over the world? It did, though. That's one thing that's undisputed. By the 4th century, the whole world is Christian. And they're all talking about this Jesus event. You know what Christianity is all about? Listen, it's a crazy idea. That this guy this man, human being, claimed to be God, died and rose again from the dead. You had to believe that to be a Christian, and everybody believed it. And there were no atheists back then. So I know I'm talking to a lot of atheists in this room, and what I'm talking about has nothing to do with that. Historically, atheism, in a kind of popular sense, is something that came much later. I'm talking 18th century is when modern atheism came to the fore. This is you were not atheistic back then. You believed in God. And the Jesus event is what united people. And when Constantine united the Roman Empire, what he did is the church came out of hiding. The leaders of the church got together in this place called Nicaea, which is in modern-day Turkey. And they formed a council, and they formed creeds that you have to believe. They define what Christianity is, and everybody had to sign off on this little doctrine, this creedal doctrine, the Apostles' Creed, which many churches, some of you say this every Sunday morning. And some of you don't. It's dogma. It's prescribed, necessary belief if you want to call yourself a Christian. And you got to call yourself a Christian in that world if you want to be a Roman citizen. If you're a patriot, you're going to be a Christian. And you're going, well, that's different than the way I think. And I'm saying it's different than the way I think too. You know, one thing that I have to talk about in my free thought class, and I'll talk to you about, is this. We are like fish in water. We don't realize the water in which we're swimming in. But if I went an hour and a half south into Tijuana, if I grabbed you and said, hey, I'm going to take you to Tijuana, I'm going to put you up in a hotel for 3 weeks in Tijuana, you're going to be very uncomfortable because, if you get sick, what do you do in Tijuana? You know what to do here. You go to your doctor, and you have got a health system. If you have a problem with the police down there, which you will have, they're corrupt. What? How can they do? And when you want to buy something, you have to dicker and what? Their culture is so different. And that's just an hour and a half south of here. It's very close to us geographically, and it's so very different than the way you think. Take me back to Laguna Woods Village where I know how things work. If I took you back 50 years ago to Leisure World, what used to be here, I can go back 50 years, and you would feel very uncomfortable going back 50 years. It's a different world 50 years ago. You were alive then, you know. I grew up in Tustin. My mom, when I was 6, 7 years old, would hand me a sack lunch. She said, go have a good time. I'd walk across the street into the orange groves and start heading up into Lemon Heights. And my mom did not worry about my safety. I was 7 years old walking by myself in orange groves, exploring. And my mom did not worry about my safety. That wouldn't happen today. Our culture, our world has changed so much. So what I'm trying to help you think through is this. Your values, your strong atheistic values, your strong Christian values, your strong Jewish values, whatever your values are, you're in this you've been influenced by your culture. And I'm asking you to go back to a different time and place and think about this a bit. And the reason I say the Jesus event was so important is because it just totally changed culture. There was no separation of church and state. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. I lived in Italy for 8 years. I speak Italian fluently. I'm dating an Italian right now. Yeah. She's great. She's a good cook, you know. But not just that, she's a great gal. And but the thing is I speak Italian. I lived in Italy for 8 years, and I learned a lot about America when I lived in Italy. I love America. I'm a patriot. I really am. But when I lived over there, I was I was able to fall in love with Italy and be critical of some things that happen here. For example, family. My family moved 3 times, but we just left my aunts and uncles and grandparents. We left them really quickly, and then, we'd go and visit them once in a while. But I lived in Texas. They lived out here. That was hard. Italians would never do that. Italian, when you have a daughter in Italy, you buy her, when you birth a daughter, you buy a home for her. About 2 blocks from where you live. Far enough so she's a little bit far away, but close enough so you can have some kind of say in her life. And you spend 18 years furnishing that house. And by the time she's married, she's got a house ready to move in right next to you, and she doesn't move 1,500 miles away ever in her life. She's close to you the whole time. It's just a different value, but I love it. I think it's great. In 1984, for the first time in Italy no longer was a Catholic nation. Up until 1984, when you paid taxes to the Vatican. You had to. It's not an option. If you're a citizen of Italy, you'd pay taxes to the Vatican, to the government. No way. And now you still pay taxes to the religion or church of your choice. So a lot of people still pay taxes to the Italians, to the Catholic Church. Germany, it's the same way. A lot of Europe is that way. We're not used to that, and that's one of the distinctions of America. The American experiment is the separation of church and state. You don't realize, because you grew up in this world, you don't realize how different our world is from the rest of the world. The Jesus event was very significant because it took a religious culture, the spiritual culture, and the political culture, and it mixed them together. They're really hand in hand for the next 1,000 years. And what you find is, there's the threat of hell, eternal judgment. There's the threat of your soul. There's a threat of just getting along. And what ends up happening is, over time, people who made the dogma or enforced the dogma became very, very powerful and corrupt. They were able to call the shots. Edict of Constantine united the world. Let me just keep going here. The Middle Ages where things get corrupt, and then you have a time of Renaissance that was kicked off, by the way, by Muslims coming over in 1453 and conquering Istanbul, all the documents, all the classic literature, Greek literature that was in Constantinople or Byzantium was taken into Europe, and it caused a renaissance. It kicked off a renaissance, which triggered off humanism. When I say humanism, what you might think is, the way I hear it talked about today is secular humanism. And it's vilified, secular humanism. But the humanism here, first of all, wasn't secular. It was very religious. It was the church leaders that promoted humanism. And just the idea of having human dignity. Women were oppressed from your perspective. From their perspective, maybe not. But from your perspective, women were not given the same civil rights as men were. There was a university system that started around 1000 AD, and only men went to it, and they studied 3 subjects: medicine, theology, and law. Right? And it's a male-oriented thing because men ran society. Humanism cracked the door to allow women to begin to be involved civilly, to get an education. It was a good movement from my perspective. Listen, I'm biased though. I'm biased. If you lived back then, you might be going, oh my gosh, scandal. But I'm biased. What are some of the factors that spurred humanism? One is the plagues. In 3 years, 1/3 of Europe dies. In 3 years, 1/3 of Europe dies. Could you imagine what would happen if in 3 years, 1/3 of America died of disease? Huge, dramatic impact on the culture. And the church had no explanation for how God could allow so many innocent people to die so quickly. Huge problem for the church, huge problem for humanity. The printing press, 1440. Suddenly we're able to, over time, over a century, mass-produce literature at a reduced cost, which allowed more and more people to learn to read and write. An amazing thing. It's expensive. It's expensive to write. And I've done a lot of work with the Bible. The Bible is written on parchment, on leather, with gold often ink, and it's very expensive to produce ancient writings. Well, with the printing press, it becomes very inexpensive. It's equivalent. People talk about the internet. How internet's, you don't read books anymore. You go online and read electronic books now, digital books, right? That's the way things are done today. It's a big shift in our culture. Well, this is a big shift in culture. Every individual, it becomes more democratic. Every individual has the possibility, the potential to become literate. And therefore become before this, who's running the world? The 10% of people who are able to read and write and think and become educated. Now, access to education is open to all. And then I mentioned the classic text arriving in Europe in 1453 after the fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans, and more globalization happens. People start becoming aware of the world. So, what happens with humanism, with Renaissance? Really quickly, I want you to just see this. What happens is a shift takes place from faith-based thinking, meaning here's the creed. I believe in God the Father. I believe in the Son. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Trinity. That was the biggest thing you had to believe to be a Christian. I believe in God the Father, maker of the heaven and earth. I forget it all, honestly. But give me in March, I'll be able to say it. But you believe the Trinity, and you basically were in. That's what you had to confess. It was a confessional faith. You stood up in church and you said it, and that meant you believed it. And that was it. It was prescribed dogma. And then what happened with Thomas Aquinas is scholasticism. People started trying to integrate the prescribed faith, the dogma, the Bible, with science, with Aristotle, with the philosophers. They try to show how it's not one versus the other, reason versus faith, but you can integrate them both together. But then what ends up happening is people start having reason, they start recognizing that maybe our reason, think of the Greco-Roman versus Jewish view. Rationalism, there's some things we know that aren't talked about in the Bible, and sometimes the Bible, man, that's really hard to believe that really happened. I mean, it doesn't seem to make sense. I'm going to flip through some of these things. Then there's a threat of independent thinking. Who's going to be the authority of who thinks? And what happens, this is, by the way, this slide goes a little bit later. After the Enlightenment, the question becomes, where does the authority for thought come from? Are you capable of thinking for yourself? And you say, of course I am. Of course, except for you're not, and you know it. Want me to prove it to you? When you get sick, do you just go and take some aspirin and lie down and sleep, or do you go to a doctor? And if your doctor does a blood test and says, hey, I'm so sorry to tell you this, it looks like you've got a cancer, you've got too many white blood cells, you've got a problem. Do you go, doctor, I'll handle this, thank you for letting me know that, I'll take care of this? No, you give yourselves over to you give your life over to people who know more about life and medicine than you do. Listen, I have a problem. I have a little bump on my car. I hear it goes dug, dug, dug. It's a little dug, 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 dug. I don't know what that's a weird sound. Now, I tell you what I could do. I could get on YouTube and I could say, when my car makes a dig, dig, dig sound, what's going on with my car? Or I could take it to my mechanic who knows much more about my car than I do and more than I ever want to know. And he can go and fix it for me. I'll pay him $50 and he can do it for me. There's so many areas of my life where I honestly don't have the time or desire to know. And so I trust experts. How about religion? It's one thing to trust your doctor for your health. It's one thing to trust your car to your mechanic, but how about trusting your eternal destiny to the Pope? Whether you're going to go to heaven or hell after you die. Now, I lived in Italy, so excuse me, I know who I'm talking to. I'm talking to Americans. I lived in Italy, and I had many people tell me, when I asked them the questions, how do you know about your life, what happens after you die, which is, by the way, that's one of my specializations is mortality. So please excuse me if I am a little morose here, but I do a lot of talking to people about death and afterlife and what attitudes they have towards a pending death, etc. That's what I do a lot of research on. So give me a break. But I talked to a lot of Italians about this. You know what they tell me? A lot of them said this. Not everyone. The Pope will take care of that for me. I'm not joking. And you guys are Americans, you think, well, that's irresponsible. That's irresponsible. Everybody needs to think for themselves. But when you have a car problem, you don't go on YouTube and look up and solve the problem yourself. You go to a mechanic. When you have a health problem, you don't go to you don't go and figure it out yourself. You go to a specialist, an expert on it, and he takes care of it. She takes care of it for you. Why do we choose some things to trust to other people and not other things? You know why? Because you're limited. You're finite. You can't put it all together yourself, and I can't either. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a pretty smart guy. I've read a few books in my day. I'm very specialized. I know a lot about one little thing about life. I don't know much about medicine, frankly. But I don't know enough to run my life. We come to the place in America, and this is the second major event in history, Descartes, where we don't trust our religious leaders or our political leaders One time you trusted your religious, can you imagine that world? Let me ask you, do you trust your mom? We all trust our moms still, maybe, some of us. I don't know where you come from, Do you trust your kids? Do they want the inheritance? What's their motive in giving you counsel? Can you trust? Who can you trust? Even your family members? All right. So we go from humanism to the Renaissance, an awakening, that means rebirth of society, humanism, and then we come to the special word Reformation, and I could spend a lot of time. In fact, I should look at actually the time. See, look at me. I can go on forever. This is awesome. No, no, I can talk for 2 whole hours, and people listen. No, my mom would be so proud. Okay. No, but we get to the Reformation. I think this is a very important point, stopping point as we lead towards Descartes. The Reformation is internal squabbles within the church. You've heard of Martin Luther, right? He started what? He was a Protestant. He was inside the church. He was a monk, and he protested against the church. You know why he didn't like the church? It was dogmatic. And it was controlling, and there's a lot of things we could talk about the Reformation or Protestantism, but one of the big things was indulgences. You all know this, I hope, but what happened at that time, and this is time of Martin Luther, early 16th century, the church was charging people. If you paid money to the church, you'd get your loved ones less time in purgatory. And that was what they're selling people. And they're selling it, and they're successful at it, but people were oppressed. Why was the church doing that? This is what made Martin Luther really angry. All that money went to Rome because Vatican was being built up. How many have been to the Vatican? Beautiful, huh? Beautiful church, St. Peter's, Sistine Chapel. All that was financed by poor people giving money to the church to save their loved ones. And Martin Luther went to Rome, and he was scandalized by it. As I hope you are too. Excuse me. Unless this world is made up of money, and that's the meaning of life, the Catholic Church at that time, excuse me, I'm not anti-Catholic. That's not my point. I know I have Catholics here, and do hear me on this. I lived in Italy for 8 years. I have a lot to say about that, but I'm not going to today. But I know in the past time I talked, I had a lot of Catholics get angry at me for some things I said about the Bible. And I just want you to hear, that's not the point. 1500s, go back to the 16th century to talk about the Catholic Church. It was corrupt. It was corrupt. And by the way, before that, it was even more corrupt. By anybody's standards. So within the church, what makes Martin Luther a hero? By the way, he's not the first one to do this. He stood up to the church and he says, I'm willing to face hell, risk everything, on this idea that is wrong. And the people followed him. Actually, some political people followed him with money, and they were able to back him. There's many people, a couple very significant people before him. Huss is one person, or Wycliffe, who stood up to the church in the Lollards, that stood up to the church in the past, but they were martyred because they said the same thing Martin Luther said. The church is oppressive. The church is immoral. This dogmatic church that imposes its belief system on everyone is wrong. And they were martyred. Martin Luther did it within the church. He became a Lutheran, right? He was a Lutheran. He was the first Lutheran. But from him branched out. Then you have Calvin, the Presbyterians. You have all the Baptists. Baptists actually trace their roots to before Luther, but the Anabaptist movement. But the point is that within the church itself, there's corruption, and then there's these internal movements that go against it because there's something rotten in this dogmatic system founded in the Jesus event. But so far, all we have is the Jesus event, and then there's a 30 Years' War. This is the most brutal per capita war that ever existed in fact, World War I. The big fear everybody had was we're going to go back to the 30 Years' War, where half of the German men died in the 30 Years' War. And it was religion. It started in religion, Protestantism versus Catholicism. It didn't end that way. It started that way, though. It ended with a power grab between Austria and Spain. We can talk about that. But many, many people died. And from that point, people said, I don't care about religion anymore. I hate this idea that religion causes so much death, injustice. And then we come to Descartes. Now, I mentioned there's two major events in world history. One is the Jesus event. The second is Descartes. This is what happens when you don't have time to prepare. Yeah. These are the big things of Martin Luther. Sola Scriptura, only the Bible, only by faith, only by grace, only through Christ, and only to the glory of God. You know, the point behind this is Martin Luther turns the culture in the direction it was heading anyway, and that is from collectivism, where we're all agreeing together and surrendering and submitting to an authority, to individualism. If you're a Lutheran today, if you're a Protestant Christian today, you believe in individual personal salvation. I come from that tradition. I got born again. I became a Christian when I was 15 years old. I could tell you my story and my experience. That's my tradition. Before this, the other option is being saved collectively. I'm part of the Catholic Church, and therefore I'm saved. That's one of the distinctions between Martin Luther. Only by personal faith do you get saved. And I'm just trying to help you see what happened there, because it has a huge impact on our world today. And it tells you what's going to happen with Descartes. There are higher literary rates with a reduced gender gap, Protestant work ethic where life satisfaction was linked with employment, economic development and growth of cities, the development of state system and state churches. So all these things happen. By the way, this is a period of time in which, like France and Germany and Switzerland and Spain and Italy start to get their own definition based on linguistic concerns. French was different than Latin. German was very different from Latin. And so people started grouping according to geography and ethnicity and language. And this is the period that's happening as well. So there's a lot more happening. I'm giving you a very selective story here. I want you to hear that. But this is the ideological issue. Counter-Reformation, what happened, and the church gets together in Trent, forms this council, and they basically oppose Luther on every one of his points. We disagree with that. They affirmed the opposite of what he said. Salvation's through works of faith, transubstantiation, 7 sacraments, the Latin Vulgate is the official Bible, veneration of the saints and relics, education of rural priests to lead the church. One of the good things that happened, from my perspective on this, was that the rural priests began to read their Bible. I'm a Bible guy. And it started to be enforced that they needed to know the doctrines, therefore they had to learn Latin. So what did they have before this? Ignorant priests. So the priests started to become more educated. So if you're a Catholic in this room, you're grateful for this period. It caused a counter-reformation, which actually reformed the church and made it more intelligent, more educated, more like what you've experienced in your life today. It led to the divide of North and South Europe. The North, except for Ireland, became Protestant. The South, except Greece, became Catholic. So Europe is divided. Now you've seen in your generation Europe becoming more and more united. And that's a big move forward or backward, depending on what perspective you have. All right, 30 Years' War, longest, most destructive conflict in European history. I'm just going to move through this really quickly. I already mentioned it. The empire population reduced from an estimated 21 million to 13.5 million people. The male population of Germany is reduced by half. Huge impact on our world. Religion was subdued as an influence in European politics. That's the biggest effect I want to talk about now. I'm going to talk very quickly about this scientific revolution. Things are happening in science behind this, which are going to become very important for us when we get down to it. But I want to talk about Descartes. He's the second biggest person in Western world history. His impact lingers into your mind. You are a post-Enlightenment thinker, and I am, I come from a Christian background, but I got to realize I'm an enlightened person just like you are, because I come after Descartes. And what did Descartes do? You know what Descartes is famous for? Well, he's a rationalist. He's a very smart man. He's a rationalist. What do you mean by that is this. He didn't trust his senses. He was not an empiricist. He was a mathematician. The only thing that's true and real is math. Geometry, angles, numbers, algebra. You loved math, didn't you, in college? Yes. That's Descartes. He said that's the only thing that's true and real is math. He refused to accept the authority of previous philosophers or his own senses. He rejected separating persons into the body and soul. He said, you're all one person. How many guys agree with that? I don't know, but that's what he thought, right? We're not separate, we're all one thing. He rejected teleology. There used to be this big argument. Divine or natural ends to explain natural phenomena. One of the big issues of science is this. It's causation. I asked this question in my class, I'll ask it of you. How many believe that you had a great-great-great-great-great-grandmother? What's her name? How do you know? You don't know your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, but how do you know? You just know. That's one of the inferential ways. It's called inferential logic. It's cause and effect. We believe in causation. We look at ourselves and say, something caused me to exist. You go back to your parents and your parents' parents, and I can say that. I mean, go back a few generations, you'll go, yeah, I got to say, I have a great, because you believe in causation. Okay? But Descartes rejected causation, teleology. There's three major proofs of God that Thomas Aquinas suggested. Origins, the fact that we have an origin, that the world is in an ordered state. And you can just look at your eyeball, and you can say, my eyeball is really interesting. If you know anything about your eyeball, it's very complex in how you see. And we talk about evolution. Well, that's a real difficult thing for some people to believe evolved. The balance of nature. By the way, we're having one of our lecturers coming up is a guy named Hugh Ross. His topic, it says new origin theories, but he's an astrophysicist. What he's going to talk about, I've talked to his team on this, is on how our world is uniquely designed, uniquely capable of supporting life. That's his major talk, and I think it's pretty interesting. But anyway, there's scientists that work on this stuff, and they think about how is it possible that we could have complex, very complex life forms by chance? And back in 1700s, they just believed that God was the origin. There's this monotheistic God behind it all. They bought into the Bible on this one. You don't have to believe that today, but I'm saying they did. And they would have laughed at you if you don't believe in that. Second way was the moral argument for God, the idea that we all have an idea of moral perfection. We all know what guilt is. And because we have this idea of moral perfection, that is defined as God. The third argument for God is teleology, that everything has a purpose. Everything has a purpose, has a goal. Descartes rejected teleology, the teleological argument for God, which is a very major argument in his day and even today for God's existence. He rejected it. And he rejected the philosophers and the theologians. He rejected everybody, the scientists. He said, I am only going to accept what I can personally experience. And he's famous for his saying, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. You know what he's really saying is this. The question before Descartes, from Jesus to Descartes, from before Jesus to Descartes is this: what is truth? What's real? Go to a psychiatrist's office and they try and analyze if you're sane. And if you're sane, it means you know what's real from what's not real, what's true. That's a pre-Descartesian, pre-Cartesian idea. You know what Descartes said? He changed the question from what is true to of what can I be certain? From what is true to of what can I be certain? You know what he concluded? That I can't be certain of anything. I don't even know that you exist. Trust me, I may be sleeping right now. I don't know. This could be one of my dreams. I've got to speak in front of a lot of people. I'm not prepared. You know? How do you know that what you're experiencing is true, is real? There really is no proof for that, by the way. Philosophers would tell you. But we believe it's true. What's the one thing he said he knew for certain? He knew for certain only one thing, and that was there's someone asking the question, what can I be certain? So really you could change this from I think, therefore I am, to I doubt, therefore I am. There's something here that's doubting everything, and I can't deny that. That's an absolute truth. And that changed everything. You listen to that and you go, oh, what's the big deal, Greg? That idea changes everything. It changes, while we doubt, we cannot doubt our existence. Doubting our existence proves that we have a mind that doubts. He introduced radical doubt as the foundation for knowledge. It was not a proof. He was not proving that he existed. It was a personal internal affirmation. So he emphasized the use of reason to develop the natural sciences, deduction over perception. I can go through this. Humans became subjects, agents, not just obedient children of God. We became subjects, not just objects. That's the important point I want to make. That's why he's the most important person, second most important person in Western thought. He shifted the debate from what is true to of what can I be certain, and thus he shifted authority for truth from God to individual human beings. You now are the authority for your life. Do you know what? Before Descartes, you were not the authority for your life. God was. You were a creation of God. You were an object of God. Now, you're not sure if God exists, but you know you exist, and you become the authority for your thinking. It marks the beginning of the modern period. He's the father of enlightenment. He's the father of modern philosophy. So there's a shift in authority for truth from God to man. Now listen, before Jesus, people were grasping at straws, using rationalism, trying to figure out their world. The Jews had God reveal himself, intervene in history. Moses didn't pray and offer sacrifices. Oh God, help me out. Give me some good harvest, or help me and my wife to have children. He wasn't doing that at all. He didn't believe in God that way. Like the Romans, the Greeks did believe that way. They offered sacrifices. They offered their children in sacrifices to try and get the gods to do something. Moses didn't do that. God showed himself to Moses. There's a whole different way of thinking. But in Jesus, you find these two worldviews collapse on each other, and you have this idea of a God-man, Jesus Christ, who's in charge of everything, sovereign. He made you. He wants a relationship with you. He's the big God who made the whole universe. He's the major God, but he's also very personal. That's the unique thing about Christianity that made it work so well. That's why people converted into it. But now what people are finding is this personal, transcendent God. Boy, look at the effect that it had on our world. It's created a lot of religious people who are very manipulative and cause a lot of pain and are unjust and oppressive. I don't know if I want to believe in that God anymore. And what happens is Descartes gives you the freedom to stop believing in him and living in a relationship with him. Did I mention I'm a Christian? The shift in center to the individual rational mind. Man takes on characteristics traditionally ascribed to God, and with it comes an assumption of the sovereignty and potential omniscience of collective pursuit of knowledge. We assume that eventually science will know and respond to all human problems. Yeah, we had the atomic bomb, but if we can just stop those people from dropping the atomic bomb long enough, maybe we can capitalize on atomic energy and not exploit the resources of our world. Maybe we can find a balance to keep this world from destroying. Climate change. If we just give enough time, man, if we can, it's a race. We can convince our politicians to, it's all about money, finance it. We're going to get all the cancer. We're going to get rid of cancer and heart disease. You're going to live to be 1,000 years old. No, 10,000 years old. Why stop there? We're going to live forever. On a perfect world where lions lay down with lambs and there's no talk of war anymore. We believe in our basic goodness over God's goodness. Where's our hope going to lie? Let's go back to the original question. What do you trust in your world? Who are you going to trust? Who can you trust? Can you trust God? That's the Jesus way. I'm not saying Jesus literally, but that's one way. Do you trust yourself? Let me talk a little bit more about critical is the role of the discerner or judge. If the king or pope is not the mediator of God's justice, who is? The individual, the state, who's going to give you justice? The military? Police? Protest marches? Is that going to bring justice to this world? That's what my world tells me, by the way. That latest I'm getting, and I work at a university where there's a lot of people that are into world peace. And what I see them doing is we need to protest loudly. That's the only answer I'm seeing them say it. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to criticize that. I'm just saying that that's all I'm hearing. I think people are bankrupt for true answers. Are you bankrupt? You know, honestly, we're at a weird place in history, aren't we? You agree? I've sounded like a preacher up here, man. Billy Graham, get him up here and do it. Yeah. The problems of the finite perspective are infinite. We are finite. You can't even fix your car. How are you going to stop climate change? Oh, we get the brightest minds together. Get Stephen Hawking and... I almost said Donald Trump. Get the smartest minds together. Let's organize. Let's finance. It's about money, isn't it? We just got to give to breast cancer research, and that'll solve all the human problems that we have. Oh, you know what? This issue? It's PETA. We need to give money to save our pets. When the fires happened in California, how many people donated money to save the animals? Screw the people. Let's save those animals because they're our salvation. They're the reason why we're alive. The reality of responsibility and consequences in society and community. We're struggling with these things, man. So this is something I talk about in my free thought class. I'm going to do it really quickly here. Let me look at the time real quick. Oh my gosh, I'm doing great. Are you guys bored yet? Let's keep going. Let's go. Okay, this is really quick, and I'm going to stop after this. We have some time for questions to talk about it, all right? But here we have it. We're sharing in divine subjectivity. So we have this creator. This is the original way we thought about it. The big S stands for subject, subjectivity. God is true. God is real. That's all that's real, and that's all that's true. Until he decides to create these objects. He creates the world. If you read the Bible, in the first chapter of the Bible, it talks about the creation of the world. In 7 days, he creates this world. Oceans and sky and reptiles and animals, birds, fish. And then finally, the 6th day, he creates humans. How important are you on this whole world? I do a lot of flying. I look down and see this massive land. I see this little light, and there's a city, and there's a lot of people lived right there. And then we go, a lot of land with nothing on it. Have you ever been to the desert? And there's absolutely nothing. Now, there's probably organisms, I don't know, but there's nothing. God creates a lot of stuff that has nothing in it. And then he creates man. And what I argue for is this is the biblical view of this, is that man is both subject and object. This is the biblical view. It's kind of a crazy way of thinking about it. You're not just created by God, but you're created as God-like. And one of the God-like characteristics you have that make you distinct from your dog, from dolphins, from elephants, from whales, from all other animals, the smartest ones, I'm trying to think of all the smart ones, right? We call them smart because they learn chimpanzees, languages, whatever. Is that you are God-like. And what does that mean? Well, can you create like God creates? There's artists in this room. You can create something, but according to the biblical record, he creates from nothing, right? Well, you can modify the creation. I'm a ceramicist, so I like working with art. I like art a lot, and I like creating things. It's really fun for me. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like you feel this creative spark. Is that God-like? I think there you go. I've got an amen over here. Thank you for the Church of Greg. Here we go. Well, man is a very unique part of creation because not only are we an object of creation, but I think we are what the Bible says we're the highest form of creation, in the sense that, in the Bible it says that humans were given charge to rule over the world. We're the kings of the earth. What this means to me, let me just go through this really quickly. As far as myself as an individual is concerned, I'm shifting a little bit. I'm going to go back to that in just a second. Of what can I really be certain? I'm going to agree with Descartes on this, that I don't know anything. All thing I know is that I exist, for certainty. I'm going to put all science, all history, all religion, every other thing that I would call knowledge, I'm going to put it in a different category. I'm going to call it faith. So, did I mention I'm a Christian? Christians believe in Jesus' death and resurrection. Do I know that Jesus died and rose again from the dead? I'm speaking to some people here that call themselves Christians, so I'm just speaking to listen to me. I don't know. I don't know. I believe. I took that. I was dating this girl named Teresa. Went to her father, a double PhD, solid state theorist, in Los Alamos, New Mexico. Went to meet the parents. He's an alcoholic, double PhD, very smart man, and I'm scared to death to talk to him. And he goes, "Your religion is just a crutch." And I looked at him, and this is my future father-in-law, and I said, "You know what? You're right. It is. And your science is just a crutch. And you just believe. You don't know anything." And he got white-knuckled. Literally, he was drunk. He was going to hit me, and he stopped, and he goes, "You're right." He's a very smart man. And all science is based on hypotheses, on theories, on belief. Stephen Hawking, the smartest man out there, whether popular or unpopular, the smartest scientists out there recognize that science is not based on certainty. It's based on probability. Is it possible that I am a UFO? You've never met me before. That I'm making up this whole story. It's possible. Is it probable? Frankly, no. There's a lot of things that are possible, and that Jesus die and rise again from the dead, for example. Take these religious ideas. Is Buddha the way to peace? I can get out of my own religious system, talk about other religious systems. The question no longer is, can we be certain of anything? Is climate change real? It's not an issue of certainty. It's an issue of probability. And all scientists, honest scientists, have to say the same thing, as do all religious people, as do all politicians, as do you. The way to go forward, at least, is to recognize that none of us is dogmatic. All of us are dogmatic. We all believe with 100% that we're right. Somehow I don't know the way out. Here's my problem. We all believe that we're right about the things that we think about. Like, I know a lot about mortality, more than anybody in this room. I've done a lot of research on it, and the biblical view of it and all that. I know it really well. I know I do. I just know facts. I know data. I have my belief system in that as well. I have to recognize that what I hold on to so strongly, what I would even die for, is not knowledge. It's belief. And when I say that, it immediately enters in a level of what I'll call humility, which makes me a good professor, frankly. I wish all professors were this way, and unfortunately my colleagues in the academy are not this way. Some people claim to know that they are the authority that everybody has to follow. I wish they presented it in the form of belief to give you the freedom to consider an idea and come to your own rational belief. But recognize that it's belief, it's not dogmatic. So here's the problem with dogmatism. Here's the problem with Descartes. And listen, we're going to have another revolution. We've had the Jesus event. We've had Descartes. There's something that's got to change. And everybody knows it. We don't know which way to go. Let me tell you what Descartes forces you to do. And this is really hard. I know it's hard. He forces you to know everything. Do you know enough to make good decisions? Do you know enough about your car to change the transmission? To know when it needs a new transmission? How about morality? Do you know enough about marriage to know if divorce is wrong all the time? To know about child abuse? How much it's so complicated. Think about the Me Too movement. There's victims and there's predators. Perpetrators. People that make victims. And you know what? Everybody in this room, I think you all know this, you're all victims. And you've made victims as well. You've hurt people and you've been hurt. Do you have enough knowledge to understand all the dynamics that are going on with that? Boy, when you talk about moral issues, this gets way out of hand. How about the president? Do you know how the president's supposed to run the country? Do you know that? Do you have enough knowledge? Have you figured it all out like he hasn't? But you, sitting in your armchair watching TV, CNN on the news, know exactly how to run the country. Because you have more knowledge than anybody else in this room. Wisdom. Even if we know enough, are we wise enough to govern with the data we have? We know about nuclear energy. We know how, but are we not going to push the button even though we know it's wrong? You know things are wrong and you do them anyway, right? Come on. And I'm not talking as a Christian Billy Graham guy. I'm just saying it's just true. I'm that way. Sometimes I do stuff that's wrong just because it's fun. And I think I'll pay the consequences later. Are we wise? Are you wise? Who's going to do it? Who's going to be the president of the world? Last question. Are we just? If we know enough and are insightful enough, are we virtuous enough to choose for the greater good? We don't trust Trump because we think he's got financial motives, we think he's got ignorance, we think he's got a lot of issues. I'm not trying to, some of you are pro-Trump, and that's not my point. I could put anybody up in that role, and we'd have the exact same questions. Who is virtuous enough to make decisions for us over the things that you can't decide enough on? Because you know what? You're just a citizen of the United States. You don't have a PhD in whatever. You don't know. You don't have enough advisors around you. Let's get all the smartest people in America together and put them in a room. Are they virtuous enough to make the right decisions? There's where our fears lie, isn't it? That's where anxiety is. But Descartes has pushed this question on us. Before we could put this on God. So some of you are angry with God. I can't believe in God because God is unjust. Look at all the evil He allows, all the suffering He allows. He can't be just. He's obviously not wise enough to run His world. He's not good. He's not knowledgeable. Did I mention I'm a Christian? I mean, I've been around the block a few times. We've shifted from giving that to God to taking it on ourselves as individuals, and we're still bankrupt. Modern dogma goes from subjectivity to collective, personal bias. There's rational versus the experiential. Well, that's not what I experience. And we become authorities. To personal dogma, which assumes that you know stuff, that you're wise, and that you're good. The authority for our personal lives, we're becoming individualistic. We're not trusting even our own families, our own kids, or our parents. And I'm going to stop right there. And I'm going to stop there without having clear answers. If you gave me till March 15th, I'd have had all your answers that you needed. I almost had them. This morning I woke up, I had my coffee, I thought, there's the answer. And it just escaped me just as I was going to walk in here, and I didn't know I was going to talk to you all. Maybe I'll get a chance to come back and give you all the right answers. But the issue is great, and I think we're going to have a shift in the way we think. We're going to have to shift and think about, what can we trust in our society? I honestly do not trust the news. And I don't care if it's conservative, liberal, whatever. I do not trust my politicians. I don't trust the academy of which I am a part. One thing the academy offers, Saddleback College, Emeritus Institute, yeah. Okay, I like this kind of forum that we have here. I wish you'd come back, invite your friends to this guest lectureship. We have a lot of people coming and talking, sometimes with authority. They think they know everything. But sometimes they do what I just did, and that I'm an authority on, I know a lot about this subject. I don't have. I like a university system that allows for discussion and ideas and the raising of questions. If I can get a question well defined, I'm doing pretty well. And I think that's one thing. That's one reason I believe in the university. Unfortunately, if you go to UC Berkeley or UCLA or USC, and we have professors coming from USC and UCLA to speak to you all on Supreme Court coming up in 4 weeks, and someone coming about UCI coming to talk to us about roboneurotics next week. Don't miss it. He's really good, talking about artificial intelligence. We have these people coming talking to you in this forum to help you think through some of these little categories of issues that we deal with. We have a guy coming. He's going to bring in a Hindu, a Buddhist, Christian, and a Jew to talk about, do all the religious believe in the same God? It's pretty interesting, to me anyway. We have a lot of people, and I think the academy is a good place. It should be a place where we have open ideas, where people are not dogmatic and saying, this is the way you have to believe. And I'm going to give you that opening too. Now, I have to have my convictions. I have my personal beliefs. I can't give this lecture without a perspective. But it's a perspective, and you have freedom to reject it or receive it. and we're going to have some time for question and answers in just a second, you have a chance to respond to me and talk about your perception of this whole thing. How are you going to do it? But, so I do believe in the academy in some kind. I believe in politics to some extent too. You have to a little bit, right? I want to be governed. I believe in news to some extent. I'm just kind of apprehensive. I'm anxious. Because I don't know. I've got to be very discerning. And even if I'm really discerning, who's going to lead me? Who's going to help us out? Is the world, are we going to go out in a whimper? And what can I do? What's my role in this world to make it a better place? It's a question you got to ask, right? As humans. Who are you as a human? I'll just leave it there. If I come back, I'll give you all the right answers. All right. Thank you. I want to open up the floor for questions and discussion. I'm going to moderate that. I know a lot of people leave at a time like this, so I'd ask you to stay if you can. A lot of people have to leave because they got buses to take and stuff. That happens on the hour. But I want to open the floor for conversation. Can we talk a little bit about this? Can we turn the lights a little bit? I can see pretty much everybody. But we have mics. I don't want anybody to, if you raise your hand, someone with a mic's going to come to you. And actually, I'm going to ask, Dan, would you mind showing me who to go to? Or someone? I don't care who. Oh, there you are. Do I see a hand? Anybody want to talk? Right down here, I see somebody. If you have a mic, stand up and start talking to me, because I can't see you.
Let's test it.
Yeah, go ahead. I can hear you.
What I learned is that you believe nothing that you hear and only half of what you see.
Yeah, don't believe it. Believe half what you hear. No. Don't believe anything you hear and half of what you see.
Nothing that you hear and only half of what you see.
But you can't go on living life like that. You can't. We are
I've been doing it.
We're compelled to trust people. Even our politicians we don't like. We have to. Go ahead. Yeah.
In this climate, in this world, do you think it's possible to have rational discussions with people anymore? That has become very, very difficult because people who have very special opinions do not want to listen to anybody else who does not agree with them, and that has become a big problem in society.
That's a great comment. Is it possible to have rational conversations anymore? Let me ask you, in this past week, how many feel like you've had a rational conversation with somebody? Okay, now what I mean is a peaceful conversation where you might even disagreed. You know, I think in past generations, in past decades, it's been a lot easier, hasn't it? And today, you know what we do is we group together with people that agree with us. If you're part of the Democratic National Committee, you'd have nothing to do with those damn Republicans. If you're a Jew, oh, you don't believe any of that Christian crap. And if you're a Christian, oh, the Jews, oh my gosh, no way. You know, but let me throw out one last point. This is a good point. Here we go. How many of you get up in the morning, roll over and turn to your spouse and go, honey, I tolerate you so much. I'm just so looking forward to the next 10 years of coexisting with you. Is that the end? Is that what we're going for? Is that the apex? You know, 20 years ago, that was what was pushed on me. We just need to coexist. After 9/11, let's just coexist with all these radical Muslims that want to kill me. Whoa, did I just say that? We need to tolerate everybody. What is that assuming? There is no absolute truth. Okay, here's the problem. How about this? Is there such thing as absolute truth? Let me put it this way. Can you believe in absolute truth? I'm not saying you know, but can you believe? Is it possible for someone to say, I believe in absolute truth? Let me tell you what's irrational, to say there is no absolute truth. That is an irrational statement. It's illogical. It's an absolute statement. There is no absolute truth. Is that an absolute statement you're making? Is that absolutely true? That there's not? In other words, honestly, I will speak for myself. I believe in absolute truth. I believe there's truth that has absolute authority over everybody's life. I am not tolerant, and I don't coexist very well. I'm not married. Okay. But no, there's a reality to this whole, and we got to walk into this. This is a very uncomfortable conversation, isn't it? It's an uncomfortable conversation. We have to walk into this as part of our dialogue. You do not want to just tolerate your partner. You don't want to just coexist with your neighbor. We want to elevate ourselves to something higher and bigger. Not the lowest common denominator. So there's a big question, and you know where I'm coming from on this. I think there's absolutes out there. I find my life, I have a lot more peace and the basis for love and for human dignity because I believe in absolutes. And that's so offensive in our culture. Well, 20 years ago, you know what's happening now? I'm becoming more the norm. More people believe that dogmatically they are right about things. And everybody else is wrong. And they're right. And they're not tolerating anybody. That's where we're heading. Okay? Now, what I choose as my absolutes, that's a good question. How am I going to choose what is absolutely true? For everybody, not just me. And so some people say every molecule is to be governed by my judgment. I am all wise, all knowing, all virtuous, and I can tell you how you're supposed to live your life and raise your kids. Okay? And that's the problem, is people go to different details with this. There are some absolutes I believe in. I believe in love. The ultimate end of everything I believe, this is my belief, not knowledge, belief system. I believe in love. And love is irrational. Love is given, not earned. I give love to people that don't deserve it and have not earned it. And I think that's the ultimate human potential that we have. Unlike dogs, unlike whales and chimpanzees and elephants, I believe humans are uniquely capable of love. To choose to sacrifice themselves for the good of someone else. That's an amazing absolute truth I believe in, that I wish everybody owned. I think this will be a better place because of it. I'm not into tolerance or coexistence. I'm into sacrificial giving and love. And that comes from a belief in God. But that's for another conversation. Yes?
Hello.
Where's I'm hearing a male voice.
Mike's up here.
Male voice, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jim Gibson. I've lived here in this community for 15 years.
Yeah.
I grew up in Orange County. My first girlfriend used to hang out with Julie and Tricia, okay, in the Nixon family. So I felt close to that family. I was raised in a Republican household. As I grew older, I began to get a little bit different idea about the way the world was run. I was into peace and love. I was part of this hippie movement going on in Orange County in those years. I got my draft notice. I was against the war. I volunteered to serve as a combat medic in Vietnam, where I served for 14 months. During that period of time, I saw unbelievable carnage. I saw the presidency switch from Democrat to Republican. I saw Richard Nixon take over. I was there when a couple of tens of thousands of American soldiers were killed. I was there when 1 million Vietnamese were probably killed when Nixon carried on that war. My political opinions began to change. I see today we have a continuation of what I saw was wrong with the world then in our current president. And so my question to you is, should we impeach Trump?
Very good question.
Okay, I love what you said. Let me talk to this a little bit, just because I think it's fun, and I think we need to talk about it. You've seen a lot of things that I've seen too. I was born in '61. I'm a little later than you, but I've seen a lot of very disappointing things in my world that have caused me to have a lack of confidence, even in my own parents, and in anyone really. There's very few authorities I can listen to in my life, and then I have someone like Trump come along. Now, I do want to put some of that kidding aside. You know, obviously Trump is extremely controversial. I've intentionally avoided using his name as much as possible in my talk this morning because, you know, I'm going to be honest with you, there's people in this room that are pro-Trump. And there's people that are anti-Trump, and I know it's very controversial. But the point I want to say is this. Who is all-knowing? Who is all-wise? And who is virtuous enough to lead us? We've gone with an American dream, an American experiment, some people talk about, that believes in the collectivity of our insights together is enough to create a greater good for all. We the people. That philosophy, that mentality allows for Donald Trump to be president. And Ronald Reagan, and JFK, and Herbert Hoover, and if you know about American history, flawed men have led our nation. And flawed men have followed those flawed men. We impeach Trump, and we've got a brand new problem. It's a vacuum. We have not just a power vacuum, we have an ideological vacuum. You don't have any answers. And I'm going to tell you something, I don't know what you think up there, but there's no one I can vote in that's going to be virtuous enough and good enough and altruistic enough and powerful enough to make this world a loving place. And I'm, frankly, as a 57-year-old, pretty discouraged. I don't think there's political answers for me. And I'm younger than most of you, much less for our kids. And I don't know what to say about that. I really like to bring me back in March and I'll give you some answers. Yeah, right here. Yeah, yellow.
Hi, I appreciate that you took over at such short notice and it was a wonderful lecture, but I feel like you may have omitted, for me anyway, what I think is a key proponent of the formation of Western civilization, and that was the Ten Commandments. I think that set rules by which humanity could be good.
Okay.
And I was surprised you didn't mention that.
No, and I really appreciate that, actually. You know, and with Jewish monotheism comes the Ten Commandments. Moses is the one that gave the Ten Commandments. Now, there's a problem. There's a couple problems. First of all, those Ten Commandments, just like the Constitution, needs to be interpreted. So in a modern context, that has to be... But we like the Ten Commandments. Some of us like the Ten Commandments because it's absolute authority. It comes down, it's from God, and it says this is how you run your life. And who's against killing and stealing and committing adultery and remembering the Sabbath to keep it holy? You can't do too much on Saturday. Okay, I mean, that's just point of the 10. But I'm not making fun of them at all. I come from that tradition. The problem we have is, well, there's lots of problems. Descartes would say, the problem is there are some people in this world, in fact, I'd say the majority, that break the Ten Commandments. Maybe 100% of us break one of the Ten Commandments in our lifetime. What happens then? We have to freely, in America, we have to freely give ourselves over individually, all of us together, to the Ten Commandments, or whatever, 6 commandments, whatever commandments we're going to choose. So we have a problem with authority. We have a problem in believing in absolutes. I tell you, I believe in absolute truth. My guess is, the popular culture is shifting, but the popular culture of the generation before me has totally denied absolute truth. We believe in tolerance. We believe in coexistence. We believe in mushing together, having nothing absolute, much less the Ten Commandments. I appreciate that. It's a possible answer, way out, if we'd all give ourselves over the Ten Commandments. You know, one of the biggest things in literature today is dystopic ideas, the idea of a dystopian society where we're controlled by a powerful tyrannical government. And some people would see a Ten Commandment type existence as being that, where we're enforcing rules, another dogma that's already been proved wrong by the church over the Middle Ages. But at the same time, you know, I'm going to tell you something. One of my philosophical hopes, if I came back to talk about this again, what I'd probably talk about is maybe some people see that we're going to evolve artificial intelligence. Humanity, as we know, it's going to get wiped out anyway. What's going to survive is cockroaches and computers who are able to adopt biological forms and rule the world. You know, that's one vision. I'm personally more conservative, and I would go back to an idea of God, and I'd look at the Bible, because that's why I spent all that time, and that's spending the big bucks and all that time working on this. I happen to believe in God, and therefore the Ten Commandments would fall into that. You'd be happy with me, I think. And a Judeo-Christian view of a monotheistic God, but that's a belief system. It works for me because it stimulates what I believe is important, which is love. The motivation for sacrificing for another person's best good at my expense, which is a very human thing. Animals can't do that. But the God of the Bible reveals himself as that kind of a person. That's why I'm really into that. I think it's kind of exciting. But I don't know what the answers really are. Yes, over here. Lynn.
I was thinking about some of the pivotal events in world history, and you mentioned Descartes, and you mentioned Jesus. But what about the discovery that man could leave planet Earth and
Form a new community.
Yeah, form
Elon Musk.
Yeah. I mean, we've landed on the moon, and someday somebody might be walking around on Mars.
Who are you going to send there? Which righteous person?
I'd rather keep that to myself. That
It
might be a one-way ticket.
The problem is us. The problem is, you know what you want to send there? Just me, myself, and maybe my wife. I'm not sure about her, though. Maybe my husband. I'm not really, I don't know. We kind of disagree. We coexist. We don't love each other.
Okay.
So what's the answer? I mean, honestly, I think you understand. I'm not going to be dogmatic up here with one answer. I'll give you how I'm coping with life right now. Take my free thought class. We talk about this. I'll have more chance to talk about it. Yeah. Right here. Up at the back. Go.
Hi, Greg.
Hey, I can't see you, but that's good. Thanks for knowing who I am.
Cynthia, I know you.
Hey, Susie.
Okay. This has been a lot about dogma and everything. And for me, I think one of the threats to our society now is political correct speech.
Political what?
Political correct speech.
Correct speech, got it. Okay.
Because who decides what's correct and who decides what isn't? If I disagree with somebody, if I feel that they are intolerant, if I look at them and say, well, the whole problem is they're intolerant, are they really an intolerant bore, or is it just that I'm intolerant of their opinion?
Yeah.
It's a very good question.
Who said that? Oh, God. Okay, good. Well, God, would you answer that question for us? Yeah. Okay, let's spend a few moments in prayer. Okay. You can't answer that question. I'm going to be honest with you. Could someone articulate that question again? God, could you articulate your question again? Because a little mind break up here. Could you say the question one more time? Is there a question? Who's going to, say it to me again, Susie.
I said the difference if I disagree with someone, is it because they're an intolerant bore, or is it because I'm intolerant?
Yeah. No, and see, the issue is this. This is how I have to operate as an individual. Am I dogmatic? Am I tolerant? Well, there are things I'll die for. I'm probably a patriot. I'd probably die for America still, if I was called to war. I know I'd die for my immediate loved ones, the small circle around me. What belief system would I die for? Honestly, I would die for my Christian belief system. If you said renounce Jesus or die, I'd probably go, no, I got to take my life. Because I have to have that freedom, and the meaning of my life finds its meaning in that. Some of you have things like that. What would you die for? That's a good question to ask. There's a level of commitment to my belief system. I'm dogmatic about those things. There's other things, what I think about Trump, that's way out here. I don't really have a lot of opinions about Trump. I'm not informed about him. I know some of you think that's an outrage. We should all be informed about everything. But I don't know much about my body either, frankly. I've got a bad back this morning. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I go to doctors for things like that. I don't know about everything. About politics, I know very little, frankly. I mean, I know enough to get angry and outraged, just like you. But I don't know how to solve the problems. Until I get to that level of knowledge, I don't like to get involved. I know an awful lot. Okay, so what I'm getting at is that I think we're all specialists. Some of you are specialists in mothering. You're mothers, and you have great kids, and you know how to raise at least your own kids pretty well. Some of you are specialists in science in some area, and you need to be the authority over me on those areas. Can we accept other people as being authoritative over us? How about your preachers and your rabbis? That they might know. But then where does personal faith come in to your religious belief? Do you just go with the flow, if you're a Catholic, go to church on Christmas and Easter and call it a day? I'm not talking about you necessarily, but the majority of people that go to church just go twice a year. I'm talking about religion and politics here. The two things we're not supposed to talk about in polite company. But that's what we've got to deal with. That's where we're at now. We have to talk about our human identity. And that's at the core. How we govern ourselves. How we run ourselves financially. Do you go to financial advisors or do you do your own stock portfolio? Each one of us is responsible for our own money, our own selves, our own souls. I guess what I'm looking for in my world is hope. And hope comes in looking at authorities. I've learned a lot by listening to authorities in my field. I'm an expert in my field because I listen and share conversations with my authorities. So I can talk to you about that. I talk to my doctor. He knows more about medicine than I do because he talks to his other doctor friends and he knows more than I do. It's a good question. It's a real hard question, isn't it? I believe in dogmatism. I'm a dogmatic. I'm not necessarily I tell my students when they come to my free thought class, you can be dogmatic, but don't be an evangelist. Don't try and tell everybody else what you believe is the only way to think about life. But have personal convictions. You can't be human and not have personal convictions in my perspective. No one is 100% tolerant. I hate those intolerant people. We're so contrary in the way we talk about this stuff. There's no such thing as absolute truth. That's an absolute truth statement. We're illogical in the way we talk about these things. Thank you for your good listening. I look forward to seeing you next week. We have a great guy coming to talk about neurorobotics. I think you're really going to love him, from UCI. Thank you very much. Thank you.